The rain that burned asterisk, the acid rain fell from the dark purple sky, burning whatever it touched. Each drop hissed as it landed on the broken metal trees of planet Xeron. The jungle wasn't green any. It was rust red and smoking. Animals had already fled or died, and now only one figure remained. Stumbling alone through the storm, Kelia ran with a torn cloak over her head. But the acid had already eaten through half of it. Her soft skin was marked with red burns, and her breathing grew heavier with each step. She was barefoot, and every time her foot hit a sharp root, she winced but kept moving. She had to survive the night, just one more night. A dim orange glow flickered in the distance, half covered by thorny brush and vines. She narrowed her eyes, praying it wasn't a trap or an illusion, but her legs didn't care anymore. They moved on their own toward the light. She didn't know if it was a human, a monster, or death waiting for her. She reached the edge of the light and saw a shielded dome, old but still working. There was a fire inside, and someone moving, a tall figure, human. She hesitated for only a second before collapsing at the edge of the shield. Her vision blurred as she whispered, "Please." Rian heard something, turned, and saw her shape through the barrier. Without thinking, he grabbed his plasma tool and stepped outside into the burning rain. He dragged her limp body into the dome and sealed it shut. Inside, the air was warm and dry, and the fire crackled softly. Her eyes fluttered open, and her hand moved to her chest. Checking if she was alive, she saw the human looking at her. Confused and guarded, but not unkind, he handed her a cloth and pointed at a water bottle. Kelia tried to speak, but only coughed a dry, painful sound. She understood only one thing: she needed to repay him to stay. Her people had rules. Nothing was free, not even kindness. So, with weak fingers, she reached for the strap of her cloak. She dropped it slowly, exposing herself as her voice trembled. "Take me." Rian's eyes widened not in hunger, but in surprise. He looked away and quickly grabbed a thermal blanket from the shelf. He wrapped it around her shoulders without touching her skin. Then he walked back to the fire without saying a word. Kelia blinked, confused, as she held the blanket close. She expected him to act like others demand. Take, own. But he simply added more wood to the fire and sat down with his back turned. For the first time in her life, her offer had been refused. Silence filled the dome. Except for the soft hiss of steam rising from her wet hair, her mind raced. Was she not beautiful enough? Was she broken? She pulled the blanket tighter and crawled closer to the fire when she spoke again. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why didn't you take me?" Rian didn't look at her, just stared into the flames. "Because you're a person, not a payment," he said simply. Kelia didn't know how to reply. Her mouth stayed open, but empty of words. She stared at him as if seeing a new kind of creature for the first time. He passed her a small metal cup with warm liquid earth tea. She sipped and coughed again, then smiled softly for the first time in days. The taste was bitter, strange, but it made her chest feel warm. She muttered, "You're not like the others." Rian shrugged, pulling his jacket tighter. "I don't know who your others are," he said, "but I'm not here to hurt anyone." Kelia nodded slowly, her eyes growing heavy as her body relaxed. The rain outside howled like a monster trying to get in. Her thoughts drifted back to her past, how her noble house was hunted and destroyed. She had seen her sisters captured, her father taken, her mother burned. Since then, she had trusted no one and survived by offering herself like currency. But now, a stranger had offered her safety without price. As she fell asleep by the fire, her head resting against a folded coat, Rian sat beside her but never touched her again. He kept watch through the dome scanner, eyes alert for movement in the jungle. Because even kindness had enemies on this planet. Outside, the acid rain began to thin, and the wind carried distant growls. The world was still dangerous. But for now, Kelia was safe, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a thing. She felt like a person. The fire glowed brighter, and the night moved on in quiet peace. The last starflower, when Kelia woke. The world didn't feel like a nightmare anymore. The dome was quiet, warm, and filled with the soft smell of steam and ash. Rian was already awake. Crouched by the fire with a metal kettle in his hands, something glowed in the pot, like a small star caught in boiling water. She sat up slowly. Wincing from the burns on her thigh, Rian turned his head just slightly, not saying anything. Then, he carefully poured the glowing liquid into 2 cups and pushed one toward her. Kelia stared at it, confused. "What is it?" she asked softly. "Starflower tea," Rian replied, then took a sip from his cup. Kelia hesitated, but followed, the warmth spreading through her chest like a soft fire. The taste was sweet, bitter, and strange, but it didn't matter. Her body was no longer shaking, and the acid burns stopped stinging so much. She studied the flower floating in her drink, a small blue petal drifting on the surface. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice still rough. "Grows in the cliffs nearby," he said. "But only during storm season. Most people don't bother to look," he added. Her fingers curled around the cup tighter, feeling safe for the first time in cycles back on her homeworld. No one made her tea, not even during the wars. Everything was politics, power, and control. Warmth was weakness. Yet here, a strange human had given her warmth with no demand. She looked at him again, more closely this time. His hair was messy, his clothes patched from many repairs. A long scar crossed his jaw, but his eyes didn't carry cruelty. Instead, they looked distant, as if always watching something far away. "Why are you here, human?" she asked suddenly, surprising even herself. He raised a brow, but answered calmly. "Peace." She tilted her head, confused. "No one comes to Xeron for peace." "Then maybe I'm no one," he replied, sipping his tea again. A silence followed, but it was a comfortable one this time. The fire cracked. The storm had softened outside the dome. Kelia pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and let herself relax. She didn't feel hunted, not yet, not here, but the silence didn't last forever. A soft ping sounded from the dome's scanner, a signal bouncing off its edge. Rian stood up quickly, pressing a button to zoom in on the outside feed. Kelia's heart dropped as she saw the shape. It was a scout drone. Her breath caught, and her eyes went wide. She jumped to her feet, nearly spilling her tea as she grabbed Rian's arm. "They found me," she whispered in panic. "You need to throw me out now?" He didn't even flinch, only stared at her with steady calm. "I'm not throwing anyone out," he said, walking toward the door controls. "You don't understand," Kelia snapped. "That drone belongs to the Zethan slavers. If they catch me here, they'll burn this place and take you too. Then I'll make sure they don't catch us," he replied. She watched him seal down the shield with extra locks and magnetic clamps. He tapped a few buttons, causing the dome's heat to rise and mask energy signals. Everything he did was smooth. Practiced. He'd done this before. Kelia's panic shifted into something else. Curiosity. "Why would you protect me?" she asked, voice shaking. "You don't know me. I could be lying." "You offered yourself to survive," he said without looking at her. "But I saw fear in your eyes." "Not greed." Kelia fell silent, her hands gripping the blanket again. His words touched something deep inside her, something she didn't show to others. He hadn't just seen her, he had understood her. And she didn't know how to handle that. Later that night, they sat by the fire again. Listening to the softened rain, Kelia stared at the fire, remembering how her sisters used to braid her hair. That life was gone now, ripped from her the day her people fell, and now the only warmth came from a stranger with scars and no expectations. "Do you believe people can start over?" she asked quietly, Rianne stirred the fire before answering. Only if they stop running. Kelia looked up, her violet eyes glowing in the firelight. I've been running for so long, she whispered. He didn't promise her safety, or that things would be okay. He just nodded and placed another log into the fire. Kelia leaned back, holding the tea close to her chest. The storm still howled outside, but the fear in her heart finally began to fade. A storm in the mind, Kelia woke in the middle of the night. Her body cold, but her skin wet with sweat. Her hands were shaking, and her breathing came in short. Fast gasps. The dome was dark, except for the low red light of the dying fire. In the shadows, her eyes searched for safety, but her mind was far from calm. The dreams had returned, burning homes. Her mother's scream, chains, and running. She pressed her palms to her eyes, as if she could block out the memories that way. The blanket slid from her shoulders, and she suddenly felt exposed again. She pulled her knees to her chest and curled up on the floor like a wounded child from across the room. Rianne stirred and slowly sat up. He didn't speak at first, letting the silence stretch between them like a careful thread. Then he said softly, "You okay?" Not expecting a full answer, Kelia shook her head. Unable to speak without her voice cracking, he got up quietly, tossing another log into the fire. The flames grew, casting gentle light on the walls, giving the dome its warmth again. Rianne didn't ask questions, didn't get closer, just sat beside the fire. Kelia stared at him through her tangled hair. Unsure why he cared at all. "I keep seeing them," she whispered finally, voice rough and small. He didn't turn his head, just nodded slowly. "The memories don't listen," she added, fingers clenching into her blanket. "They come even. When I'm safe, that's how you know they're real," he replied without emotion. She blinked at him, confused by the answer. He looked at the fire, his jaw tight, eyes dark like space. "I see people too," he said. "Every time I close my eyes, for a while." They both stared into the flames, lost in separate storms. But there was something comforting in not being alone in the silence. Kelia sat up slowly, wrapped the blanket around her shoulders again. She moved a little closer, still keeping a careful space between them. She whispered, "Do humans cry?" And immediately regretted asking. Rianne gave a dry chuckle. But there was no humor in it. "Only when it's safe," he replied, "and only when it won't matter." She didn't fully understand what he meant, but she felt the weight behind his words. The heat of the fire made her skin sting where the acid had burned her. Without asking, Rianne grabbed a small metal case from his kit. He opened it, revealing a healing salve he had made from local herbs and compounds. She hesitated when he approached, but didn't pull away. He kneeled in front of her and looked into her eyes, waiting for permission. She gave a tiny nod, and he began applying the salve with slow, gentle movements. His hands were steady, his touch light, almost too careful. Every time she winced, he paused and waited before continuing as he worked. She studied his face in the firelight. There were tiny scars near his brow, and his eyes held pain deeper than age. He wasn't just a wanderer hiding from war. He had seen things, lost things. She wondered if they were alike in more ways than they knew. "You don't ask for much," she said softly, breaking the quiet. "I don't expect much," he replied. Without looking up, she frowned slightly, unsure if that was a warning or a truth. But for some reason, it made her trust him more when he finished. He put the salve back in its case and returned to his spot by the fire. Kelia remained seated, her legs stretched out, the warmth soothing her nerves. "I never said thank you," she whispered, "for the tea, the shelter, everything." Rianne gave a small nod, like that was enough, like he didn't need more. Suddenly, a sharp noise buzzed through the domain alert from the scanner. Both of them froze, eyes locked on the screen. A heat signature had entered the outer edge of the jungle. It wasn't human, and it wasn't alone. Kelia's breath hitched. Panic, returning like cold water down her spine. Rian stood quickly and began disabling every unnecessary device inside the dome. He pulled out his pulse pistol, checked its charge, and handed her a small blade. She looked at it with shaking hands. "I don't kill anymore." He looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Then just survive." She clutched the blade tighter, her body torn between fear and fire. Outside, the dome's scanners pulsed faster. The heat signatures were circling. Whatever piece they had found tonight was about to be tested, but Kelia didn't feel completely alone anymore. The storm in her mind still raged, but now someone sat beside her in the dark. Not to fix her, not to use her, but simply to stay, and for that she held the blade and waited, ready to defend the only place that had ever felt like home. Asterisk, the stranger with the gun. Asterisk, the sound came again, louder this time, a dull knock against the dome's outer shell. Kelia froze mid-step, her breath catching in her throat as her hand tightened on the blade. Rian stood silently, already by the door with his back against the wall, weapon drawn. The scanner blinked red, showing a life form standing just outside the energy shield. He held up one hand to Kelia, signaling her not to move or speak. Her heart pounded against her ribs as if trying to escape her chest. Through the blurry projection feed, they saw a tall figure cloaked in black armor. It wore a breathing mask and carried a plasma rifle strapped across its back. The figure raised a small silver badge and pressed it to the dome's outer shell. A low mechanical voice came through the dome speaker. "Registered bounty patrol. Request shelter access." Kelia's knees buckled as she backed up toward the fire, eyes wide with horror. "That's not a patrol," she whispered. "That's a Zeltron hunter." Rian didn't react, didn't ask questions. His mind already running ahead, he pressed a button on the console, adjusting the shield's voice filter. "What do you want?" he asked in a flat, steady voice. "Routine search." The voice answered. "Tracking signal drifted near your coordinates." Kelia's blood turned cold. She had forgotten about the tracking tag sewn under her collarbone. She dropped to her knees and dug her fingers into her skin, searching for the tiny bump. Rian turned, saw her pain, and quickly grabbed a medical tool from his kit. She nodded quickly, giving him permission without words. He used the small extractor and carefully removed the grain-sized chip. Kelia bit down on her hand, stifling her scream as tears streamed down her cheeks. Rian dropped the chip into a steel cup and smashed it under a boot. The scanner blinked again, then slowly calmed, no longer detecting its signal. Outside, the figure tapped the shield again. "Anyone else inside with you?" Rian stepped closer to the control panel and said, "Just me." There was a pause, the kind that stretched long enough to twist the gut. Then the voice replied, "Mind if I come in to confirm?" Rian's jaw clenched, and he turned off the speaker without answering. Kelia stared at him, her voice trembling. "If they see me, they'll take me." He didn't speak, just walked to a hidden panel and tapped it open. Inside was a secret compartment, just big enough for her to hide. She crawled in, still holding the blade, her breathing sharp and shallow. He looked at her for a long second before sealing the panel. Then he turned to face the door, weapon ready, mind calm. Outside, the dome shook slightly as the figure walked around the structure. The knock came again, but this time softer, more like a test. Rian tapped the interior pulse switch, sending a single electric pulse through the door. It was a warning shot, silent to the ear, but loud in intention. Whoever stood outside knew now they weren't welcome. Another long pause followed, then footsteps slowly faded into the jungle. Rian stood still, listening for movement, his weapon still aimed. After 5 minutes, he opened the secret panel again. Kelia crawled out, sweat-soaked and shaking, but her eyes burned with new fire. "You lied for me. she said quietly. Looking at him like he was someone entirely new wouldn't be the first time. He said, sitting by the fire again. Kelia sat across from him, too overwhelmed to speak. He tossed another piece of wood into the flames without saying a word. "I don't understand you," she said finally, her voice cracking. "You don't ask questions. Don't expect anything, and you risked everything for me." Rian looked up, his eyes soft but tired. "Maybe I'm just tired of seeing good people get dragged away," he said. She wanted to argue, to say she wasn't a good person, that she had blood on her hands, but somehow those words didn't want to leave her mouth anymore. Instead, she whispered, "I don't know how to repay you." He shook his head and answered, "You don't owe me anything." Outside, the jungle fell quiet again. The hunter gone for now, but Kelia knew they'd be back, and stronger next time. Still, something had changed inside her. Something hard and cold had started to melt. Not because she had been saved, but because someone saw her as worth saving. The escape tunnel, Kelia stood in silence as Rian packed his small backpack with sharp, practiced movements. The slaver drone might have gone, but they both knew it wasn't over. Tia, they had seen what he looked like and likely traced the domes. Power signature, they would return, and next time, they would bring more than just a question. "We can't stay," Rian said, tightening the straps on his gear. Kelia didn't argue this time, not after seeing him lie for her, fight for her. She glanced back at the spot where she had hidden in the wall. The space that once felt like a tomb now looked like a memory of fear she didn't want to relive. Outside, the acid rain had slowed into light mist. Still poisonous, but easier to manage. Rian handed her a pair of old boots and protective leg wraps. They didn't fit perfectly, but they were warm and dry. For the first time since she arrived, Kelia felt like she was being treated like a person, not prey. They moved through the jungle with speed, Rian leading the way. The path twisted between burnt-out roots, rusted trees, and pools of steaming acid. He moved like someone who had mapped every inch of the land with his boots and his blood. Kelia followed closely, gripping a walking stick he had carved for her during the night. After an hour of silent travel, he stopped in front of what looked like a pile of rotting stone, but he reached forward and moved a flat piece aside, revealing a hidden grate. Kelia raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What is this?" Rian didn't look back as he replied, "My escape tunnel." They climbed down a narrow shaft covered in moss and ancient vines. The inside smelled like earth and cold iron, but it was dry and quiet. Small lights blinked from the sides, powered by something buried deep underground. Kelia whispered, "You built all this?" "Had time," Rian answered, lighting a torch and handing it to her. As they walked, the tunnel curved downward into what looked like an old mining route. Rusted equipment and broken carts lay on the sides, abandoned long ago, but the path was solid, strong, and kept them hidden from drones and satellites above. Kelia stared at the carved walls, running her fingers along the stone. "Why did you plan so much if you didn't expect trouble?" Rian gave a tired smile without turning around. "Because expecting peace is a good way to get killed." His voice echoed in the tunnel, heavy like truth forged from scars. After walking for another hour, they reached a quiet cavern lit by natural crystal veins. Glowing blue light filled the air, reflecting in Kelia's wide, amazed eyes. She had never seen anything so beautiful in such a broken place. "This is where we rest," Rian said. Sitting down and unpacking dried food, Kelia sat beside him, her legs sore, but her mind racing. She took a bite of the bland ration and asked, "Why did you even come to Xeron?" He looked at her with the smallest hint of a smirk. "Because I made a mistake. I thought leaving the war behind would make the nightmares stop." Her eyes dropped to her hands, still scratched and bruised from her journey. She thought about the fire, the rain, the hunter, and now this tunnel. None of it made sense, and yet all of it felt more real than her years of hiding in palaces and cages. "I think I made the same mistake," she whispered. They sat in silence for a long time, the crystals above flickering like distant stars. Kelia leaned back against the rock, feeling its warmth from hidden thermal veins. She turned her head toward Rian and said softly, "You never once treated me like a tool. I didn't know that was possible until now." He didn't answer. But the way he handed her the last piece of bread said enough. Kelia didn't cry, but her throat ached with a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. It wasn't love, not yet, and it wasn't trust, not fully, but it was something. And that something gave her the courage to ask, "Will you keep running if I stay with you?" Rian blinked at her, the question hanging between them like smoke. "I don't run," he said. "I move." Kelia smiled for the first time without sadness clinging to it. Then she whispered, "Then let's move." The slavers circle. The ground trembled before they ever heard the sound. Kelia and Rian both looked up at the same time, their eyes narrowing toward the tunnel's edge. The crystals above their heads flickered once, then dimmed slightly. A low vibration pulsed through the stone beneath their feet like the heartbeat of something cruel. Rian grabbed his bag and shoved the last of the supplies into it without speaking. Kelia stood quickly, her instincts already screaming that something was wrong. She moved toward the entrance of the cavern and listened, ears straining against the silence. Then it came, the rhythmic thumping of heavy boots on soil and steel. "They've found the tunnel," she said with dread in her voice. Rian nodded, already flipping a hidden panel along the rock wall. A new path opened, narrower, rougher, leading deeper into darkness. Kelia hesitated, then followed him without question. The path twisted like a snake beneath the jungle floor. They moved fast, the light from their torches bouncing wildly off the stone. Kelia's breath came in short bursts as her injured leg began to ache again. But she didn't stop, not even when the first blaster shots echoed behind them. They reached a chamber that opened into a deadened nothing but stone and silence. Rian placed his hand on a scanner built into the rock, and a section began to rise slowly. But it was too slow, too loud. And the enemy was too close. Kelia turned, raising the blade he had given her, her back pressed to the wall from the shadows. The first slaver stepped in, a tall brute covered in black armor. He grinned through a cracked helmet as he aimed a weapon directly at her chest. Kelia's hands trembled, but she didn't lower her blade. She'd rather die standing than ever be chained again. Before he fired, Rian moved like lightning, slamming a rock into the brute's shoulder. The blast fired wide, sparks lighting the tunnel as Kelia charged forward. She slashed the slaver across the faceplate, cracking it, then ducked as Rian shot again. Two more enemies appeared behind the first, forcing them to retreat. The hidden door finished opening, and they stumbled through it into a narrow passage as it shut behind them. Rian dropped a small device on the floor, then pressed a switch. The explosion shook the entire tunnel, sealing it with fire and dust. They coughed and stumbled into a new chamber, only to find they were not alone. In the center stood a woman in pale armor, her hands raised and eyes glowing faint gold. Around her were 5 more slavers, but none were armed, all frozen in place like statues. Kelia's blood ran cold as she recognized the mark on the woman's armor, high caste. Zeltron commands, someone who had once dined with her parents before they betrayed them. "Well," the woman said calmly, "you've made quite the mess." Kelia stepped forward without thinking, hatred boiling in her chest. "You burned my house, took my sisters, and called it justice." The woman tilted her head, amused. "And now you hide behind humans." Before Kelia could speak again, her vision blurred, her knees giving out. The energy she had used in the last fight had drained what little strength she had left. Rian caught her before she fell, holding her close and turning to face the commander. "If you want her, "You'll have to go through me," he said, voice sharp like stone. The commander laughed lightly, but it wasn't kind. "I don't want her," she said. "I want what's in her blood." Rion's grip tightened, and Kelia opened her eyes just enough to whisper, "Don't give them anything." He didn't answer. He was already moving, already planning, already choosing. War. The moment the commander raised her hand, Kelia's body pulsed with raw energy. A shield burst from her chest, expanding like a wall of force, throwing the slavers back. Her scream echoed through the chamber, not of pain, but of defiance. Even the commander stumbled, her armor cracking from the impact. Rion carried her through the side corridor, while the enemy struggled to recover. The tunnel behind them collapsed as more of Kelia's energy pulsed through the stone. She was barely awake now, her lips murmuring old words in her native tongue, but in her arms she held no weapon, only fire that refused to die. The shelter built for two, the jungle, was silent again. But not because it was empty. It was the kind of silence that came after thunder. When the storm had passed, but the ground still remembered, Rion moved carefully through the foliage. Kelia held close to his chest. Her skin was pale, her breathing shallow, and the glow in her veins was fading. He reached a small clearing hidden behind a waterfall, one he had scouted years ago but never used. There, built into the cliffside, was an old survival station sealed in vines and moss. He laid Kelia gently on the soft, moss-covered ground, his hands never shaking. Then he activated the station. With a broken code he still remembered from another life. The door opened, warm air spilling out, and inside, the old systems flickered back to life. He carried her in, laid her on a bench padded with faded blankets, and closed the hatch behind them. She mumbled something in her language, her fingers gripping the edge of his shirt weakly. He placed a hand over hers and whispered, "We made it." The medbay inside still functioned, powered by a geothermal coil buried deep in the rocks. Rion applied the autogel to her chest, watching the burns and energy strain fade slowly. Kelia's breathing eased, her body relaxing under the machine's soft hum. He sat beside her, silent, only letting himself breathe when her pulse stabilized. Hours passed without words, just the quiet rhythm of healing. Kelia opened her eyes slowly, blinking at the soft yellow light above her. Her vision cleared, and she saw him sitting beside her, head leaned back, fast asleep. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him with a warmth that rose from her chest like sunrise. When he finally stirred, she smiled weakly. "Did we win?" He looked at her, then gave a small, tired smile of his own. "We survived," he said. "That's better than most." She laughed softly. The sound cracked, but real. "I'll take it." She sat up slowly with his help, the blanket still wrapped around her like a second skin. Her hair fell across her shoulder, tangled and wild, but her eyes were clear. He looked at her with a strange expression, not fear, not desire, just something quiet and full of meaning. She looked away, nervous, but the feeling didn't scare her anymore. "You carried me," she said softly. "You ran through fire with me. You screamed light into stone." He replied, "You made slavers fall to their knees." They both smiled again, and the silence that followed was no longer hollow. It was peace, even if only for now. In the days that followed, they worked together, rebuilding the station. They fixed the food replicator, set traps for jungle scavengers, and patched the water filters. He built her a small shelf from metal scraps, and she decorated it with wildflowers for the first time. Kelia didn't count the days backward to when she was taken, but forward into something unknown. One night, under the safety of stars behind the clear shield above the station, Kelia sat beside Rion. The fire pit between them crackled gently, casting soft orange light across their faces. She reached into her coat and pulled out a silver pendant, the last thing she owned from her old life. She handed it to him without a word. He took it carefully, turning it over in his palm. "It's beautiful," he said. "It meant I belonged to someone," she said, "but now I don't want it to mean that." He didn't ask what she meant, he already knew. He tied it to a cord and looped it around her wrist, not her neck. "I could have taken you that first night," he said quietly, looking at the fire. "I know," she whispered, watching the flames reflect in his eyes. "But you didn't," she said. "And because of that, I gave you something I never gave anyone." He looked up slowly. "What's that?" She reached across the flames and touched his hand, not trembling, not uncertain. "My choice," she said, her voice steady. "My heart, they didn't kiss. Didn't say words that would trap them in promises they weren't ready for. But in that moment, under that sky, they belonged nowhere else but here." The jungle outside still whispered threats, and the galaxy still turned in its violence. But inside that station, between a burned-out soldier and a girl who once offered herself to survive, something stronger had grown. Not a transaction, not a rescue, something built, something chosen, something that would not burn away with the rain.